Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Berkeley Day 2. Now, the subtitle list says 3 dialogues between Hylas and Philonous, but we have some business to finish up with from that first dialogue, and mainly because we're getting a little bit long last time. We won't get so long this time. We'll cut off a little bit here too. We'll see. But the main thing we want to start with is this very famous argument, very important argument too, that has been used by philosophers even up until today, even as a matter of fact. This is a generalized argument, and it's called the argument from illusion, and we're going to use Thompson's version of this on 204 to 206, and I've reproduced most of it here. Okay, let's let's look at this. The argument occurs in 3 steps. Okay, step 1. There we go. Hang on. I'll look at it here. First step. The real properties of an external object cannot change without an occurrence of a change in the object itself. 2. The colors I perceive can change without the occurrence of a change in the object itself. That is, you can do this just by putting on a different color pair of sunglasses. You can do it by changing the lighting. You can do it by looking at it at night rather than day. You can put a black light in your light socket. Any number of things you can do to change the color of an object without changing the object itself. Okay? He concludes from this, therefore the colors I perceive are not the real properties of an external object. Notice what this does. This sets the criterion that the real properties of an external object must meet in order to be the real properties. Okay? So the real properties, if they're to change, that requires a change in the object itself. Okay? That's step 1. Step 2. Either the colors I perceive are real properties of external objects, or they're only ideas. 5. The colors of objects I perceive are not real properties of external objects. Again, that's just the conclusion from the first step, right? Therefore, the colors I perceive are only ideas. Okay? Between steps 1 and 2, Berkeley shows us that colors exist only as ideas. And premise 4 there presents us with 2 exclusive options and claims that these are exhaustive. Either the colors I perceive are real properties of objects, or they're only ideas. There is no middle ground for them. Okay? So, step 3. Here, Berkeley shows how the argument about color equally applies to all sensible qualities whatsoever we perceive. The sounds we hear, taste, smells, all of them, even sensations of touch, are all subject to illusion. They can change without the occurrence of any actual change in the external object. And by the way, Berkeley goes on to claim the same thing is true of Locke's primary qualities, right? The weights of something can change without the occurrence of any change in the object itself. All you can do is put it in lesser gravity, put it in the water, and that doesn't change the object itself. He concludes from this that these sensible qualities cannot be real properties of external objects, hence they're only ideas. Okay? Now, if all this is the case, then all sensible qualities we perceive are only ideas. In other words, we perceive only our own ideas. Let's talk about how Berkeley uses this argument. Common sense tells us 2 things. Objects exist in the external world, and they possess in themselves the properties like shape, size, and color. Okay, that's the first thing. Second, that we perceive these objects, and we perceive their color, shape, size, etc. But, according to Berkeley, these 2 statements are inconsistent. Check it out. If we insist that tables and chairs and such are really part of the external world, then the argument from illusion implies or shows that we never perceive them because all we perceive is our own ideas. If, on the other hand, We want to insist that we do perceive tables and chairs from the external world. If we do insist that we perceive tables and chairs, the argument from illusion tells us that they're not in the external world, because if we perceive them, they have to be ideas, because all we perceive is our own ideas. So, if we say that that chairs and tables are in the external world, then we don't see them, because all we perceive is our own ideas. If we say that we do see them, then we say that they're ideas, because all we can perceive are ideas. A very clever argument. Okay? But a response here might be, don't we need external objects to explain where our ideas come from? Okay? Section 18 on 490. But though it is possible that solid, figured, movable substance may exist without the mind corresponding to the ideas we have in bodies, yet how is it possible for us to know this? Either we must know it by sense or by reason. Those are our two fountains of knowledge, right? As for our senses, by them we have knowledge only of our sensations, ideas, or those things that are immediately perceived by sense. Call them what you will. But they do not inform us that things exist without the mind or unperceived, like those which are perceived. This the materialists themselves acknowledge. It remains, therefore, that if we have any knowledge of external things, it must be by reason, inferring their existence from what is immediately perceived by sense. But what reason can induce us to believe in the existence of bodies without the mind from what we perceive? Since the very patrons of matter themselves do not pretend there's any necessary connection between them and our ideas. I say it is granted on all hands, and what happens in dreams and the like puts it beyond dispute, that it is possible we might be affected with all ideas we have now, though no bodies resembling them existed without. Hence it is evident the supposition of external bodies is not necessary for producing our ideas, since it's granted they're produced sometimes and might possibly be always produced in the same order we see them in present without their concurrence. So Berkeley doesn't think that we need external bodies to explain our ideas. The conclusion from this, since we cannot know whether external bodies exist, it is not necessary to posit such bodies as the cause of our ideas. But it might be argued that external bodies may be necessary in order to explain our ideas. This may be the simplest or best explanation for their production. In that next section, in 19, we're not going to read them, so I want to tell you about this. Berkeley breaks out the old problem of interaction. Boom, there you go. Material bodies, he argues, cannot explain our ideas. How in the world could a material thing, one substance, have a causal effect on an immaterial substance or spirits? So, if we're two fundamentally different kinds of things, this is Descartes' problem of interaction done outside of us, from inside to outside, right? Bodies are out there, they cause ideas in us. Well, how can they do that? Doesn't seem possible. Okay? So, wrapping this part up, for Berkeley, there are no external objects. Sometimes he argues that believing in them is contradictory. Sometimes that believing them is meaningless. By the way, both strategies are potent. The dialogues. We're going to fill in this session some of the perhaps the gaps or the holes from the principles, and maybe just fill out some of that stuff. Some of what we do in this session is going to be similar to and certainly related to what we did before, but we're going to see how Berkeley deals with some of these issues in the dialogues. Okay. Now, in the dialogues, Hylas starts out as what we call a direct realist. He believes that external objects really exist, that they have qualities that the qualities we perceive them to have, or qualities they really have, and so forth. Okay. So Philonous in the dialogue slowly breaks him down eventually moves into being a Lockean, and eventually, of course, convincing of his own position. But first, we want to start talking about our ideas of sense. And Thompson offers up this argument right here. 1. In sense perception, we perceive nothing but sensible qualities. 2. All sensible qualities are nothing but ideas. 3. Therefore, we perceive only ideas. Okay? But does it follow from this that they don't also exist in the world? Hylas challenges premise 2, all sensible qualities are nothing but ideas, by arguing that heat and sound are more than ideas. They exist independently of the mind. And we're going to do a little bit of dialogue here. I mean, it's going to be actually a monologue because it's just me here, right? But first, though, note that Hylas has argued that sensible things are those which can be perceived immediately by the senses. To this, Philonous notes, this means that we don't perceive the causes of sensible things, but only the sensible things themselves. Okay? That is, we don't perceive the causes of sounds, but we perceive the sounds themselves. We don't perceive, when I experience heat, I feel heat, not the cause of heat. Okay? Now, okay, we're going to look over the dialogue on 498. Let me first of all go ahead and move this one more. Okay, and this is Philonous' first response to Hylas's belief that things exist independent of the mind, that this direct realist kind of view. Okay, now 498, we're going to start about just that far down to the top of the page, like the fourth. 1, 2, 3, the fourth Philonous. Does the reality of sensible things consist in being perceived, or is it something distinct from their being perceived and so bears no relation to mind? Hylas then replies, to exist is one thing, and to be perceived is another. I speak with regard to sensible things only, and of these I ask whether by their real existence you mean a subsistence exterior to the mind and distinct from the being perceived? Hylas, I mean an absolute real being, distinct from and without any relation to their being perceived. So he's trying to say that these things exist absolutely independently of the mind. Okay? What about the heat? He goes on now. Okay? He says, at the bottom of that first column, but is not the most vehement and intense degree of heat a very great pain? No one can deny it. Is any unperceiving thing capable of pain or pleasure? No, certainly. So he won't say that the warmth is in the fire, but the intense heat and pain is not in the fire. But the intense pain and heat, the great heat, is merely a matter of degree from the warmth. So these are just matters of degree, not different kinds of things. Right? So, how is it that the warmth is in the heat, but the pain isn't? Because they're the same thing. Okay? So, from the summary from all of this, from this section, is that intense heat is only a sensation in the mind, and intense heat is a pain. But notice this, since all degrees of heat are equally real, then all degrees of heat are ideas. Because pain is an idea, it's not in the fire. Why do we say that warmth is in the fire when that's also an idea? Heat is an object of sense and not a property of things. This is Philonous' first response. Okay? He then very methodically goes through the same kind of argument with taste and sound. And if you're interested, you can look at the one about sound. That one's actually pretty good. That's on 501 and 502 there in the dialogue. Okay? Where's my clicker? Philonous' second response occurs a little later. And this basically is a restatement of the argument from illusion. And this one is on 503 and 504. This is just a couple of paragraphs from Philonous here, 503 that goes into 504. The point will be past all doubt if you consider that in case colors were real properties or affections inherent in external bodies, they could admit of no alteration without some change in the very bodies themselves. Remember that principle, how he came up with the real properties? That if you can change the property without changing the object itself, it's not the real property. Okay? But is it not evident from what's been said upon the use of microscopes, upon a change happening in the humours of the eye, or a variation of distance, without any manner of real alteration of the thing itself, the colors of any object are either changed or totally disappear? No. All their circumstances remain the same, change with the situation of some objects, and they shall present different colors to the eye. Remember that bottle from last time? Up close it's one size, far away it's another size. Things change like that. The same thing happens upon viewing objects in various degrees of light. What is more known, the same bodies appear different colored by candlelight when viewed on an open day. At these experiment of a prism which separates the heterogeneous rays of light alters the color of any object and will cause the whitest to appear a deep blue or the red naked eye. And tell me whether you're still of the opinion that every body has its true real color inhering in it. If you think it has, I would gladly know further from what certain distance and position the object, that particular texture information, what degree color body is necessary for ascertaining that true color and distinguishing from apparent ones. That's basically the argument from illusion. Okay. At this juncture, notice that this leads to a discussion of, in the dialogues, of the treatment of primary and secondary qualities. Berkeley, of course, he's going to address this explicitly because of Locke. Hylas is trying to defend the idea that there is something outside of him. Okay? Philonous has convinced him that things such as colors, tastes, temperatures, and smells, or what we know as secondary qualities, exist only in the mind. But Hylas still wants to maintain that some sensible qualities are not ideas, but are really properties of objects that exist independently of perception. Now, in order to do this, he offers up primary and secondary qualities we've just seen, and let's take a look at Philonous' response on 505. This is pretty good, actually. Top of the page. You are still then of the opinion that external extension and figures are inherent, external, and unthinking substances. But why am? Well, the same arguments which brought against secondary qualities will also prove against these also. So he's going to apply the same arguments he made against secondary qualities being inherent in things against primary qualities. Okay? Is it your opinion that the very figure and extension which you perceive by sense exists in the outward object or material substance? It is. Have all animals as good as grounds to think the same figure and extension which they see and feel? Without doubt they have the same thing. Answer me, Hylas. Do you think the senses were bestowed upon all animals for their preservation and well-being in life, or were they given to men alone for this end? I make no question they have the same for all animals. If so, is it not necessary they should be enabled by them to perceive their own limbs and those bodies which are capable of harming them? Certainly. A mite, therefore, must be supposed to see his own foot, and things equal less than it as bodies of some considerable dimension. At the same time appear to you scarce discernible, or at best so many visible points. I cannot deny it. And to creatures less than a mite, they will seem even larger. They will. The extent that you can hardly discern will to another extremely minute animal appear as some huge mountain. All this I grant. Can one and the same thing at the same time of itself at different dimensions? That would be absurd. But from what you've laid down, it follows that both extension perceived by you and that perceived by the mite itself, as likewise all those perceived by lesser animals, are each of them the true extension of the mite's foot, that is to say, by your own principles, you're led into an absurdity. Look, the relativity of primary qualities is just as much as the relativity of secondary qualities. Okay? Now, at the end of this section, of this little bit, from 505 to 506, that Philonous right there, He says, at the concessions already made, I hope you'll stick at nothing for its oddness. But on the other hand, should it not seem very odd if general reasoning which includes all other sensible qualities do not also include extension? If it is allowed that no idea nor anything like an idea can exist in an unperceiving substance, then surely it follows that no figure or mode of extension, which we can either perceive or imagine or have any idea of, can really be inherent in matter. Not to mention the peculiar difficulty there must be in conceiving a material substance prior to and distinct from extension to be the substratum of extension. Whatever the state of sensible quality is, figure or sound or color, it seems equally impossible that it should subsist and which does not perceive it. This substratum, that's going to come up in just a minute. Okay? Now, after this, Philonous goes on with similar arguments about motion and solidity. And on 507, he shows us that he offers his criticism of abstract ideas. You can look at that. I won't work over that one, but yeah. And his conclusion from this is that not even primary qualities can be said to exist in the thing. Berkeley's final, well, not really, but in this dialogue maybe, attack on the primary and secondary quality distinction comes at the end of the first dialogue, where Berkeley points out that primary qualities cannot resemble our ideas of sense because an idea can only resemble another idea. Okay, to say that our ideas of quality or ideas of primary qualities resemble the qualities themselves, we have to be able to compare them. But we cannot see primary qualities because all we can see is our own ideas. Therefore, we cannot compare them. Right? So we can't talk of resemblance unless we can compare them. So let's look at this a bit more formally. Berkeley points to a tension in Locke's resemblance thesis. Namely, there's a tension between the following two claims. A, primary qualities resemble their ideas. Okay? And B, we can perceive only our own ideas. Berkeley argues that these two notions are inconsistent. When we add to them the following, which presumably are both true. We do not perceive primary qualities. Remember, all we perceive is our own ideas. And D, in order to assert that two things resemble each other, we must in principle be able to compare them. Okay? Claim C, we do not perceive primary qualities, follows from B, we perceive only our own ideas. And given that B, C, and D are true, then A must be false. So, we can perceive only our own ideas. We do not perceive primary qualities. In order to say that two things resemble each other, we must in principle compare them. We can't do that, so we cannot say that primary qualities resemble their own ideas. Wow. That's tough. Now, we must now turn to material substance. Okay? In this dialogue, Berkeley gives a very interesting argument, one that is clearly directed immediately at Locke. And this one is 509 to 510. It's not too much. Let's go ahead and look at some of this. 509, the Hylas in the middle of that second column. This is Hylas right there. Hylas. I acknowledge, Philonous, that upon a fair observation of what passes in my mind, I can discover nothing else but that I am a thinking being, affected with a variety of sensations. Neither is it possible to conceive how a sensation could exist in unperceiving substance. But on the other hand, when I look at sensible things from a different view, considering so many modes and qualities, I find it necessary to suppose a material substratum, Locke's substance, but without which they cannot be conceived to exist. Material substratum How did you become acquainted with that? By what senses? It is not itself sensible, its modes and qualities only being perceived by the senses. Polonius. I presume that it is by reflection and reason you obtain the idea of it. Hylas. I do not pretend to have any positive idea of it. However, I conclude it exists because qualities cannot be conceived to exist without a support. It seems then, Polonius says, you have only a relative notion of it, and you can conceive it not otherwise than by conceiving the relation it bears to sensible qualities. Right. Be pleased, therefore, to let me know in what that relation exists. Is it not sufficiently expressed with the term substratum or substance? If so, then, Polonius says, the word substratum should import that it spread onto the sensible qualities. True, and consequently under extension. I admit it. It is therefore somewhat its own nature entirely distinct from extension. Hylas. I tell you, extension is only a mode, and matter is something that supports modes. And is it not evident that the same thing is supported from different things supporting? So that, Polonius, so that something distinct from and exclusive of extension is supposed to be the substratum of extension. Just so. Answer me, Hylas. Can the thing be spread without extension? Or is not the idea of extension necessarily included in spreading? He goes on to point out there's going to have an infinite regress. What supports a support? So you're going to wind up here with an infinite regress. And so Hylas ends up saying, oh no, I don't know what to say about this. Okay? Interesting argument there. Is it literal or is it not? Now, finally, this first dialogue, let's do a summary and a wrap up. Okay? Like Locke and Descartes, Berkeley held that we perceive only our own ideas. He offers an argument from illusion, the argument from illusion, and others to support this claim. He criticized Locke's primary and secondary quality of distinction and ends up attacking the notion of material substance. Okay? In essence, Berkeley wants to show that based on Locke's empiricist principles, one of three conclusions must be reached. The idea of material substance involves a contradiction. B. Material substance is utterly unknowable. C. The idea of such a substance is vacuous. So that Locke is committed either to a contradiction, or to skepticism, or to a meaningless thesis. A, B, and C. Likewise. Okay? Now, much of Berkeley's criticism rests on the assumption that we can perceive only our own ideas, and that all sensible qualities are only ideas. We can sum up his arguments like this. Locke's position must assert one of the following alternatives. Okay? External objects have sensible qualities or something resembling them, or they do not, one or the other. If Locke chooses one, then Berkeley's strategy is to argue for alternative A, that the idea of material substance involves a contradiction. Okay? On the grounds that it's a contradiction to suppose that an idea could exist anywhere but a mind, and that the only thing that can resemble an idea is another idea. If Locke chooses alternative 2, on the other hand, then Berkeley's first strategy is to argue for B, material substance utterly unknowable, okay? On the premise that something unperceived cannot be known. As for a second strategy, he argues for option C, the idea of substance is vacuous, on the grounds that something unperceivable or unknowable cannot be significantly talked about. Okay? Now, all this argument is on this handout right here. This is also from Thompson, page 214 and 215, and I will also post it up on the Moodle. Okay? All right, now, The last thing we have is to discuss here briefly our assignment for this one. And this one is going to be a little bit more, perhaps some of the others, but you will have the weekend to do this one. Okay, I think. Maybe? Anyway, yeah, you should. You will, yeah. Yeah, you'll have the weekend to do this. So we're doing this one on the 16th. It'll be due on the 21st. Berkeley argues, rather strenuously one might say, against Locke's conception of substance's distinction between primary and secondary qualities. Describe and discuss one or two of Berkeley's criticism of Locke's view. Are Berkeley's criticisms effective? Who wins? Now, feel free to consult Thompson on this one, or you can just, look at the stuff we've done here, or look at Berkeley and Thompson. By the way, Berkeley's criticisms of Locke in the principles are from section 8 to 15 in part 1, not the introduction. That's where we discuss abstract ideas. So you got plenty of place to look at that right there. Okay, and this one will be at least 2 pages, I would say, about two good pages. Okay, and there you go, Berkeley II out.